Charles Taze Russell beginnings. A lot of you probably know a lot about Charles Taze Russell, as he's been our wonderful pastor in the beginning of the truth movements, and he was the head of the in charge of the, I guess you could say he was the chief um, uh, shepherd in gathering up the little flock and harvester in gathering up the wheat at the end of the age and throughout the harvest period. But a lot of people probably don't know the much about his start and how he began. And so I found a book and did a bunch of research and came up with some of his childhood experiences and stuff. I think this is a good study in the fact that it makes you realize that he went through a lot of the same things that you and I go through throughout our Christian lives. And he didn't, he responded really well to this and these experiences. And of course, because of it, God richly blessed him with becoming that servant who gave us the truth that was due at the time. He didn't give out all the truth. A lot of the truth came from other brethren too, but he was the one who opened the storehouse and he edited things and he made sure that all things followed along with the true themes of the Bible. So we will go on with this little discourse here. And first of all, Charles Taze Russell, father, Joseph Little Russell, and that's pronounced Little, it's not Lytle, was the son of Scots and Irish parents. He was born in Londonderry, Ireland, in July 4th, 1813. Joseph's citizenship records show that he became naturalized to the United States in October 26, 1848. Now, given the required 5 years residence, he couldn't have immigrated from Ireland any later than 1843. The records of the ship Massalot show a Josh Russell as a passenger and arriving in Boston Harbor on May 20th, 1839. It cannot be confirmed that this was him, but it's the best record of his arrival. Some attribute the Russells' immigration to the Irish potato famine, an event that is dated 2 years beyond the Joseph's last possible arrival date. So this is unlikely. No contemporary source tells us why Joseph came to the United States, but the likely reason is political and economic instability. Even though the Protestant North, where he came from, Londonderry, suffered less than the Catholic South, the economic situation was still poor. The US was not a welcome place for the Irish immigrants at that time. It was made up of predominantly Yankee, hard and shrewd, Protestant and anti-Catholic, as well as anti-British and anti-Irish. However, it offered more opportunity than England. Joseph's brother, Charles Taze Russell, spelt with a T-A-Y instead of a T-A-Z, immigrated earlier in 1823 at the age of 17. Joseph had two other brothers who also immigrated to the United States. Their names were James and Alexander. Our pastor's mother, Annalise Byrne, was Irish also and migrated to the US separately with her brother, probably in the year 1845. She met Joseph Little Russell and was married to him in Pittsburgh. In 1850, census has the Russells living in Allegheny City's 4th Ward. This was an area of mixed population, but mostly merchants. The census tells us that they were renters and that Joseph was a merchant. Joseph and Anne's first child was Thomas Byrne Russell, who was born in March of 1950. Charles Taze Russell, our pastor, was their second child and was born February 16th, 1852. Their third child was Margaret M. Russell, and she was born in March of 1854. And here we see a picture of Joseph, Thomas, I should say, and Charles sitting together. On August 11th of the year 1855, when Charles was only 3 years old, his older brother, Thomas, died of whooping cough. 2 years later, in 1857, Joseph and Anne became parents to another daughter, who they named Lucinda H. Russell. Unfortunately, she also died July 21st, 1858, of scrophula, a tubercular infection of the lymph nodes. Joseph's business failed around the time of Margaret's birth, and by 1857, the family was in Philadelphia. Joseph was listed in a directory for 1861 as a grocer. Anna Lisa Russell became pregnant again in February of 1859 and gave birth to another son, who they named Joseph Little Jr. Baby Joseph died of croup on April 25th, 1860. So here we see Brother Russell lost 3 of his siblings, and there was only one left, which was Margaret, who was born in 1850, born the third child of the family. By this time, Lisa Russell had become seriously ill with tuberculosis. She moved to Pittsburgh, leaving Joseph in Philadelphia to administer the business interests. She died January 25th, 1861, 3 months before the South Carolina militia attacked on the federal forces at Fort Sumter, which was the start of the American Civil War. Partly due to their belief and partly due to frugality, the Russells dressed themselves and their children plainly, and they tried to make their clothes last as long as possible. This was our pastor's habit for many years. Even after acquiring some wealth, he not only dressed plainly, but shabbily. He didn't change his practice until those who circulated his writings strongly suggested that for the sake of his public image, he wear new and better quality clothing. Joseph and Annalise shared in the family discipline. They, like most parents, at that time used corporal punishment to discipline their children. His mother used corporal punishment mixed with hellfire. Our pastor remembers that he didn't get many spankings, and he remarked about one of them. I can count the whippings I got in my life on my fingers. I got just 5, and I remember all about every one of them and all of the circumstances connected with them. I got 3 from my mother. I want to tell you about one of them. I was about 5, as near as I can remember. She had a pair of leather tars that would bite at the end, but do no real harm. There were about 6 or 8 tails to them. Their hurt was in their tails. Charles, bring the tars and come upstairs. So I carried the tars upstairs. She said, "Now sit down here and I will read to you out of the Bible." So she read to me from Revelations all about those without all the liars shall have their place with those who burn with fire and brimstone, etc. And she said, Charles, I do not want you to have your portion with those in the lake of that burneth with fire and brimstone. And it is my duty as your mother to give you chastisement, and I must do it. I do not want to whip you, but I must do it for your own good. This is from What Pastor Russell Said, page 55. His parents told him that he was duly christened to the Presbyterian Church, but he admits that they, at the time, didn't really understand what true baptism was all about. Brother Russell did, however, believe that the Westminster Confession had some truth. I had all the advantages that occur from the Westminster teachings about the fall of man and the original sin. Although we had wrong conceptions as to what constitutes the penalty of sin, nevertheless, we had the facts that our first parents were created perfect and placed on a perfect environment in Eden, that they had sinned and had come under God's curse, and that somehow the results was that all our race was still under that curse, which we thought was eternal torment. We did not understand the Bible as thoroughly as now. And this is from Pastor Russell's sermons, pages 657 and 658. We also wrote about his goals. He also wrote about his goals as a child. From childhood, the writer has had a broad sympathy for the heathen and an earnest desire for their uplift, which must include their knowledge of Christ. His intention was to be a missionary to the heathen until he discovered two things. One, that God has a future time for dealing with the whole world. And two, he discerned in divine providence that although God is no respecter of persons, he has evidently designed the gathering of the majority of the elect from amongst the Semitic and the Aryan races of Europe and America. This is from Watchtower, July 1st, 1911. Our pastor was about 7 years old. His mother, Anne, told him, Charles, I want you to know that I gave you to the Lord, as Samuel's mother gave him. It is my hope and prayer that in God's providence you may become a minister of the gospel. We recall, it's funny how Brother Russell here sometimes would refer to himself in the plurality and sometimes as in a second person. But he wrote, we recall the impression made upon us and our reply at the time, Ma, I think that when I grow up, I shall prefer to be a missionary to the poor heathen. The people here have many preachers, have many churches, while the poor heathen have few. From the Watchtower, July 15, 1911. Being brought up a Presbyterian and being taught the eternal torment of all but the elect, the loss of his mother and siblings contributed to his anxiety over the state of the dead. About this he wrote, if I believe the doctrine and meditate upon it, it will surely make me crazy, as it has done hundreds and thousands of others. From Pastor Russell's sermons. The Civil War was probably also a factor in young Charles's preoccupation with the death state. When the war started in the city of Pittsburgh, hangman's nooses were hung from the lampposts and were labeled with the words, "Death to traitors." Assaults were committed on those who expressed sympathy to the secessionists. Names of the war dead were published in the newspapers. Funeral sermons and eulogies were frequent. Partisan sermons fed on the war spirit. Talk of violence filled Pittsburgh. The Russells could not escape it. There is no record of how the Russells reacted to this and of family discussions during this period. Our pastor was educated in the common school system. The common school system was an accelerated system. Graduation came after the 7th grade, and most graduates were 12 years old. Within this system, our pastor could have taken subjects assigned for high school students in the public school system. But Brother Russell also educated himself through his preferences of reading material. He probably did not limit himself to the reading of only religious material, but his teachings later in life revealed his personal choice in reading material and the way he became so well in that way he became so well informed on so many topics. He taught that as consecrated Christians, we should avoid fiction novels. Not that to read them was a sin, but to avoid them was a better show of our love for the truth. If we are following God's admonition through the apostle in this text, it will mean an avoidance of fiction, of novels, of unrealities. This, on the other hand, will mean an increased reverence for whatsoever things are true, an increased devotion to them, an increase of time for their study, an increase of the spirit of truth in our hearts as a result. And he was referring to Philippians 4:88. Finally, brethren, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is of good repute, if there is any experience, and if anything worthy of praise, dwell on these things. And this came from Zion's Watchtower, October 15th, 1901. Our dear brother Russell says, always saw things in biblical terms as seen in this discourse. I remember as a boy passing along the street of Pittsburgh. One evening, after the snow had fallen, I walked over one of those old, smooth iron cellar doors when it was covered with a thin shimmer of snow. Just as I stepped upon it, I went down that quickly, snapping finger. And just as I fell, I thought of the scripture that says, pride goeth before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. I do not know that I had any haughty spirit in connection with that fall, but I concluded that I could learn a good lesson from that. I watched, and my experience is that there are slippery places along the spiritual pathway. And when we are carelessly walking along, thinking about something else and not minding our feet, not watching where we are stepping, is the time when we are likely to go down quickly. This is from Souvenir Notes, Bible Students Convention, 1910. Shortly after the death of his mother, our pastor joined the Congregational Church, which was similar in doctrine to the Presbyterian Church, the sole difference being the approach to governance. As were most churches, his church was socially centered. Our pastor saw this as misdirected. The Congregational Church turned to fairs, bazaars, sales to raise money. Some churches were so preoccupied with funding that the chief item of religion was begging for money. This led him to a lifelong conviction that raising money by any means except voluntary donation was ungracious, a cheap form of begging, an attempt to wheedling from the people money, which they are not really anxious to give. When he was 15, he started to think seriously about his relation with God. A simple portrait by James Sant of a young girl entitled Soul's Awakening sparked his awakening that our pastor experienced. He said this about that inspiring portrait. This is a picture that is known as the Soul's Awakening. It represents a young girl sitting in meditation with a book in her hand. She is bending her eyes and looking toward the Lord in space. The thought that the picture gives to my mind is that here is a young person who has been in the ordinary affairs of life hitherto, but now has seemed to get the eye of understanding opening, seemed to come out of the sleep, as it were, seemed to awaken. The body was awakened before that, but now the soul is awake to think about God and the things of the future, about the meaning of the word of God. This is from Souvenir Notes, Bible Students' Convention of 1913. We talked about this awakening. When I was 15 years old, I said to myself, see here, you understand that God has permitted you pray to him as a child because your parents were God's children, and because the believing parent had a sanctifying influence, an effect over the child from the standpoint of divine providence. So I said to myself that evidently it was all right that as a child, that I should pray, the Lord, come through my parents, I was acceptable to the Father. This is indicated in the scriptures. But now I am going to be 15 years of age, and I am thinking about other matters. Is it not about time? I was thinking some about my relationship to God as a personal matter. I have the opportunity of making it for myself. From Souvenir Notes, Bible Students' Convention, 1911. He saw this as his true dedication, writing that he, when 15 years of age, gave the Lord his heart with reverence and worshipped him with what amount of knowledge he had. He was confident of God's acceptance, even though indoctrinated to believe that only the elect would reach glory, and that all the non-elect would experience eternal torment. For he believed this doctrine was the will of God. He also wrote about his confidence in the Lord's acceptance of him. He often used the royal we when speaking of himself, were accustomed to thinking of ourselves as one of the elect, and to appreciate the love of God, which had provided for our salvation of the elect. From the Watchtower, December 15th, 1914. As, at this time, Brother Russell's goal was to save as many sinners as possible, so he became very active in the YMCA. He was drawn in by its tracting work. The Pittsburgh YMCA also offered evening classes in a wide array of subjects, which may have been one of the ways he furthered his education. In the beginning of 1868, his faith was severely shaken. His evangelical work led him to an encounter with an infidel young man. He debated unsuccessfully the truthfulness of the Bible, focusing on righteousness of the eternal torment doctrine. He wrote about this experience. I was a Congregationalist, and in my endeavor to be faithful, I was trying to convert an infidel, and I did not convert him. But while trying to do so, I got enough new thoughts into my head to give me a lot of trouble. And finally, I became an infidel and was about a year in that condition. From the Zion Watchtower, extra edition of April 25th, 1894. He also wrote about this incident and how it actually, by the Lord's providence, became a blessing. We began the narrative at the year of 1868, when the editor, having been consecrated child of God for some years and a member of the Congregational Church and the YMCA, began to be shaken in faith regarding many long accepted doctrines. Brought up by a Presbyterian and indoctrinated from the Catechism, and being naturally of an inquiring mind, I fell a ready prey to the logic of infidelity as soon as I began to think for myself. But that which at first threatened to be an utter shipwreck of faith in God and the Bible was under God's providence overruled for good, and merely wrecked my confidence in human creeds and systems of misinterpretation of the Bible. What Pastor Russell said, page 607. He examined the heathen religions, but very quickly saw their folly. Some biographers wrote that he examined the heathen religions for years, but Brother Johnson suggests otherwise. Brother Johnson writes, he therefore set out to learn what the true religion was, and to this end decided to investigate all religions until he would find out the true one. So he began with that of the Chinese, whose ideas of creation is this: in the beginning, all was water. Then a god with a handful of earth boarded a boat and threw this earth into the water, where it grew into the present earth. That was enough of the Chinese religion for him. Worse absurdities than this made him reject Hinduism and Buddhism. The fact of the Mohammedanism was partly based on the Old and New Testament impels him to reject it. And because Judaism was based in part on the Old Testament, he rejected it. Thus, his rejection of the non-Christian religions left him for a while stranded high and dry on the shores of unbelief, though all the while he devoutly held to God as perfect in wisdom, justice, love, and power, and trusted him as such. The Parousia Messenger, page 434. Our pastor wrote about this time in his life and how he went through 3 stages. For the economy of time here, I have shortened what he wrote. Confidence lost. A few years later, however, reason began to assert itself over superstition. We inquired of ourselves, where is this hell which you preach? What do you really know about it? Confessing our own ignorance, we went to our teachers and elders. But to our amazement, we found that they knew no more about it than ourselves. Then we stopped preaching and began to think and to examine the creeds. We found that the difference between them was trivial. All had the one foundation of heavenly salvation for the few and eternal woe for the thousands of millions. The more we investigated, the more sure we felt that the great mistake had been done, that a real God could not have made such an arrangement as our creeds declared. We threw them all away, and thinking that the Bible was the basis of them all, we threw the Bible after them. Soul hungered for God. But having once known our Heavenly Father, we could find no rest without him. Our soul hungered for his love and care. We still held to the great fact that our universe had an intelligent personal creator. Left to the resources of our own brain, we reasoned. Could others and ourselves possess as the gift of our Creator the quality of justice and love, which we esteem to be very highest of our faculties, and yet the Creator himself be devoid of these attributes? Again, we worshiped him, rejoicing that we could have confidence in our God and realize that he had made neither the earth nor the race of mankind in vain, but that he had some wise, just, loving purpose in connection with our creation. Confidence regained. Thinking that he had already examined the Bible sufficiently, we turned our attention to heathen religions, only to find them less rational in some respect, though less fiendish than our own creeds. Evidently, the most intelligent peoples have been the most thoroughly seduced by Satan and his doctrines of demons into believing the most horrible things respecting the Creator and his purpose toward his human creatures. Finally, we resolved to begin anew the study of the Bible, first assuring ourselves that our colored creed spectacles were thoroughly broken and our mind entirely untrammeled. Gradually, the Lord led us to a clear and yet clearer light upon his word, until we found that the basis of all our difficulty lay in the fact that we had followed Satan's lies, told to Mother Eve in Eden, "Ye shall not surely die." The Watchtower, December 15th, 1914. Our pastor then began to study hard on his own, with the Bible study class organized in Allegheny. He endeavored to find the truth. He would only accept what was learned from the creeds if it passed the test. The method was to use a concordance and study the Bible topically. Gradually, the Spirit led him to all the truth due in the harvest time, and he became that faithful servant. The Allegheny class grew to include his father, his fleshly father, and his brother in the Spirit, Brother Joseph Little Russell, and his sister in the flesh and in the Spirit, Sister Margaret. To close, I will read one more quote from our dear Pastor Russell. Truth, when due, is due to the household, and it is of little consequence either to the Spirit who has it to communicate, or the church to whom it is intended, whether it come by one vessel or another. If Luther had refused to carry the message given him for the church, someone else would have carried it. And what he brought was not his, it was the church's. And each member of the church was as much the owner as Luther. The Lord's way seems to be to give truth through various channels, here a little and there a little. Possibly the reason is lest the vessel should be puffed up above measure, and that the church should know that its head is the fountain of every blessing. From Zion's Watchtower Supplement, July 1859. And here's a picture of Brother Russell, the poster that was Pastor Russell, T. Russell, defender of the Bible in the critic's den. May the Lord have his blessing.